Good to see
Here we
you.
are.
Long time no see.
It's been a while. How are you?
Thank God. And you?
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem. It's actually 2 years ago right now that you had a panel discussion of rabbis. I believe it was about pornography.
It was more broad than pornography. We called it Let Go and Let God. So it was about how the message of recovered addicts, or the message for recovery, extends beyond addicts. And maybe a lot of people. And I believe your father had just passed away, and so you were unable to join.
Tonight is the second anniversary of his passing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so it is exactly 2 years.
Out the door, and I asked my wife to call you, saying that, so let's make this a commemoration to his life that he spent. And actually, it makes a lot of sense because we're not talking about pornography. We're talking about the human need to connect.
Right.
And we all have that need. And I think my father, just in his merit, he brought a lot of people together, and there was a lot of connecting. So it's apropos.
So tell us something about him, so we can connect to him.
So my father was actually from a generation where he didn't go to high school. Grade 6, he left to work in a factory, and nevertheless, he did what he had to do. He raised us, took care of us, and one thing I shared about him was when I'm going into water and it's cold, the feeling you're about to walk into water and it's cold, so you have to hesitate, right? There's that few seconds, and then you finally jump and you're so relieved you did it. He was about take that jump. He was about go, man, go, just jump. And that's a great lesson. It's a great lesson to sometimes just bring the body, just do what you got to do. And that's my father. But
pray with your.
I'm sorry?
I said pray with your feet. Take the action.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about you, Ellie Nash. First of all, you know how we came to see you? We came to meet you. We have a therapist at Lifeline, Jennifer Cotchery from London, England, who called me one day and she says, I got the perfect person to speak at our film festival. Somebody I saw on TED Talks. I said, oh, TED Talks. Okay, who? And she tells me Ellie Nash. I said, Ellie Nash, one of the boys. And that's how we came to meet.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. You've done a lot of good since. And before that, too, tell me a little bit about it.
2019 at the festival, my wife and I came up to Montreal. My wife doesn't usually share her side of the story.
Right.
She did that night.
She did. I hate to say it because you were but she was a star of the show. There's no question. Her vulnerability and her honesty. Wow. It's still, I have people even not so long ago will tell me, like, whatever happened. So with Mrs. Nash. So send our very best to Mrs. Nash. She made quite an impression. I'm sure she's continuing to. But tell me about Mrs. Nash a little bit.
To share her video, which is not public, but I have a recording of it with people where I think it'll be helpful. So every once in a while, I end up sharing the video to people.
Okay.
Because
that perspective is so important. It's such a big part of what we do.
It's the wife of the sex addict shares, right? There's often a lot of shame in sex addiction, and that's compounded oftentimes for the spouse dealing with it. So it was powerful for me as well to hear her share her side of the story.
Yeah. So what is your side of the story? Who's Ellie Nash, and what are we talking about? Tell me a little bit about you.
We'll talk about sex addiction, a little bit of porn addiction and recovery. That's really where you wanted to go with this, right? Porn addiction?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, it's the addiction it's the addiction of the 21st century. It's getting a lot of people. So my own story, I grew up in Brooklyn and Crown Heights around a lot of people who looked very similar to you, except if they wore a color shirt like that, they were asked to go to Canada. In Brooklyn, it's only white. And it's white or black where I'm from. And porn is definitely black. But at a young age, I after maybe it was connected to this, maybe it wasn't, but after a several year period of being sexually abused by an older friend, and I guess that was my introduction to sex in some way, I found solace and comfort in images of scantily clad women that started with, lingerie sections of catalogs that would show up to my home. And this is actually important just in terms of explaining how different and how difficult porn addiction is today. So for a teenager today. So I was born in 1985. So when I'm sharing these parts of the story, I'm probably 12 or 13 years old. It's 1997, 1998, around that time period. I'm fascinated by pictures of scantily clad women, and my ability to access them is dependent on what shows up in the mailbox, basically. I can't really go to a bodega and they'll sell me anything. I look too young. And, Playboy wasn't showing up, but maybe there was a catalog with a lingerie section, and those would quickly be scooped up and hid somewhere in the house. I was an avid sports fan, so once a year, you get the Sports Illustrated swimsuit. That was fun, and that gets its special place. And then Victoria's Secret catalogs, I remember those coming, etc. Right? And as I got to, 13 or 14, I think it was, my sister won a computer at an auction. And there was like these, these Chinese auctions. You put $5, $10, or $20 into a pot and you get raffled off. And she won a computer, a compact Presario. I remember it, this massive thing. It was put in the living room. And suddenly our family had a computer that we all shared. Previously, my father had a computer. It wasn't ours that accessed. This was my sister, so it was a lot of, easier to access. And what I would do as young age, 13, 14, is I'd wait for the family to go to sleep. I remember the first time, I don't know where I heard about it, but I heard of Playboy.com. And I went online and I typed in Playboy.com. I don't remember what showed up, but over time, I found pornography. And I remember as I did, I was kind of shocked by some of the images. It's not like, I heard from someone whatever. It's not being too graphic. It's not necessary. So I won't be. But at first it was shocking. But over time, I found that watching pornography, it's like kind of pushed the boundaries. What was interesting and like a little bit shocking one day is the next day not so shocking. It's similar to UFC for, fighting fans or things like that. Remember the first time I watched UFC, every time someone got punched, I turned my head like, okay, how do you watch that? Now it's just, oh, wow, like that was a cool move,
Right.
And that's kind of what happened with pornography, and it escalated, but it still was at a place where in order to access it, I needed to be in the living room of my house.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And always in secret. Always in secret.
Of course, always in secret.
Talking about it with your friends even, or you were talking about it with your friends?
Not so much talking about it with my friends. I remember once being over at a friend. I was probably 16 or 17, and one of them was speaking about a porn DVD he had, and he popped it into the computer, and he was watching.
So then this is like 3 years in doing this stuff. No one knows about it.
No one knows. Even if it came up sometimes, porn itself is not so shameful, right? Meaning it in the sense that a lot of people know it, understand to make a joke about it, but the dependency is where it gets shameful. I'll tell you, fast forward a little bit when I kind of knew I had a problem. So porn escalated beyond porn for me. It's where it started, but eventually I got addicted to strip clubs, prostitutes, etc. Right? And then eventually, as it got really bad, I found recovery. And then the solution was one and the same. It wasn't a different program for prostitutes and for porn, so that was good. But I remember one time having a business meeting at a strip club, and this is maybe 10 or so years ago. So we're 4 guys, we meet there, have some drinks, talking business. Maybe we're there for an hour, hour and a half. And after that, you're not going to be the guy who's going to sit right to the stage throwing the dollar bills or stuff like that. Just here, it's in the background. And after about an hour and a half, I leave the meeting. We all leave. We all get in our car. And as I'm driving away, a thought goes through my head, I'm not done. Like, why don't I go back? I can't really enjoy it the way I want to with a group of people. I need to, be alone. Right? Real addictions in isolation, especially sex addiction. So I turned back around and I came I come back to the strip club, and I start spending time there, money, talking to some of the girls. And at some point, it dawns on me that I'm the only one who turned back.
Mhm. Right.
Like,
Right.
okay, maybe this is a little bit different. Maybe what I'm experiencing here, my obsession is a little bit beyond just what guys do. Oh, all guys watch porn. All guys, are into sex. No, this was a little bit different because we're four guys, and I was the only one who turned back. So it was something that's like, hey, it definitely gave me some pause. But going back to what it was through childhood, it definitely took a lot of effort at that stage to access pornography in my home, in the living room, right? So I had to make sure no one was watching, and then anyone can wake up. I have 8 siblings, parents, a small house. Anyone can wake up at any point in time. But still, it got me. And it wasn't until in my early 20s, I had a laptop, living on my own, that I was really able to get lost in pornography properly.
That's your question. The
Sure.
scenario is this: it's 1990s. You said you have there's 8 kids in the family, small house.
Correct.
You are for years by this time sneaking to look at pornography with that type of crowd around you, and no one ever saw anything. No one ever said anything. You never got busted all those years.
No one ever said anything. No, there was stuff. I had magazines all over the house, everywhere, right? So not porn magazines, but like I mentioned, those catalogs that would come, I'd put in different places.
Right.
And
right.
Because it was a small home, I wanted to make sure it was everywhere. So in a pile of books in the living room, right in the back, okay, that's going to be in this. This book probably no one opens. I'll put it in there. This in the linen closet. This is a linen that hasn't gone on a bed in 4 years. No one's going to go in there.
Right.
And looking back, it was clear it was much more than sex for me. It was
right.
much more.
Hearing. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. It was this, the way I've described it since is that it always felt like there was a lot of noise in my head, right? Thoughts, just, spinning around. And whenever I looked at these pictures or went to one of these places, it felt like the noise stopped. There was peace.
Right.
It felt like safety. And that's what I was searching for. And that's why it was so important for me. And you're making a good point, at the risk of getting caught, embarrassment, definitely not a comfortable conversation for any teenager, certainly not for one in a very religious home.
Right.
But it was much more than just a picture. I wasn't going to wait for the next magazine to show up, quickly, go through it and then let it get into someone else's hands. No, this had to be stored for future safety, just in case of it, quite literally. And, so it continued and so it progressed. And like I said, until my early 20s, when there was no holds barred. In the meantime, during that, I was introduced to strip clubs and massage parlors and prostitutes and the internet. But one thing I think about often is take my story, exactly, right, and just put it in the year 2022, and what's it like? So if 1997 is 2022, if there's a 12, 13-year-old who's experiencing the same feelings that I just get with a smartphone, with what a computer can access. It's just, the internet has escalated sex addiction to such a degree, we're not dealing with the same disease anymore.
We're the same brains anymore.
Correct.
So you're now living on your own, you were saying? You lived in, that's when things really escalated at that point. And then what happened?
There were a couple of warnings, certainly, as it was progressing, and each there's lines that we put, these imaginary lines. I'll never do X. For example, at the beginning, strip clubs started at a young age. I was still in school in yeshiva, actually, in Canada. I found out the age is 18 and not 21. Once I turned 18, it was like open season. Every neon sign I saw, I turned my head like, is that a strip club? And that became that became an area I dove into. When I moved out on my own, early 20s, and like I said, open season in all regards. There was no reason for me to stop. Wasn't trying to stop. I didn't see it as an addiction or anything else. Fast forward, I'm about 23 or 24, and I start running into some problems in business. The problems I ran into were, I guess, best described as me not being able to stand up for myself. So I started making a little bit of money. People are asking me for things. I have an inability to say no or to set boundaries. And I keep ending up in situations I'm uncomfortable with. Giving money I don't want to give, paying money, stuff like that, committing to things I don't want to commit to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I talked to a friend about this. Says, why don't you go to a therapist? So I said, okay, and I wasn't so comfortable with the therapist, but I heard that this specific therapist that I went to had worked in businesses before and would help business owners, be better in business or help employees better in business. I was like, oh, okay, it's that.
So you're going for a coach more, it sounds to me. You were thinking you're going for a coach.
It was the way I coached it. He was a therapist. I don't know.
Right.
15 years ago, I didn't hear this term life coaches like we do,
Right.
like we do now.
Right.
He was definitely.
But you weren't going for help for deep personal pain. You were saying no too much. It was getting you in trouble. You were regretting it.
It was affecting business. There were two things. There were two things that were going to save my life. I had kind of the best and the worst of addictions. I had the addiction to money, right, to work, and the addiction to sex. Those were the two. One is very highly regarded in society. Oh, the guy's work. Oh, wow, what a guy. And the other is like the scum of the earth, what a pervert, right? X, Y, or Z. I kind of had the best and worst of the addiction world, and it started interfering. My decisions started interfering with one of the things that was giving me an identity, a sense of safety, a sense of security, a sense of everything, which was money. So I went to a therapist. I remember the term, not coach, but I remember the term industrial psychologist. That is a psychologist for industry. I was like, oh, okay, I can go to him. So I went. He asked me what was going on. I shared that. I actually remember the way I described it. I said there's a disconnect between my brain and my mouth. My mouth thinks no, my mouth says yes. I got to figure out what's going on. And he asked me for some examples. And I gave him some examples. And he asked me a very important question. He said, can I ask you a personal question? I said, yeah. He said, were you ever sexually abused? I was like, whoa. And I said, yeah, I was, actually. He said, you ever tell anyone? I said, no, I never did tell anyone. It's the first person I'm telling. I said, why do you ask? So he said, I'm asking because the patterns you're exhibiting are consistent with someone who's sexually abused. So it feels that way to me, like you could be sexually abused. I didn't believe him. I was convinced that this was a question he asked everyone.
Uh-huh.
And he was just, checking the box. And it took me 2 or 3 sessions for him to persuade me that, no, this was not a question he asked everyone. And if he did get to it with everyone, he certainly didn't ask it as the first question in the first 15 minutes. In other words, what I was exhibiting and what I was experiencing and what my challenges were directly connected to things that I experienced in childhood, which I was intentionally trying to bury. So keep in mind, I'm not anywhere close near any of the addiction or porn or prostitutes. I'm not even close to that. But what he did clue me into was the effect of childhood trauma on our lives. And that set me up. That was very important for me. That right there, that understanding that things that happened to us in childhood could affect us was a very important realization. And I began working, once I noticed that, I said, hey, I remember looking at it as that guy winning. I don't want him to win. I don't want him to, he's going to affect me from 15 years ago. No way, he's not going to win, right? Success is the greatest revenge. Whatever he did to me, I'm going to have to undo. And I worked, still working, right, on undoing that. And my therapist eventually encouraged me to confront him and have a conversation with him. And that's the whole story in its own right. For those who are interested in that story, I have a video on YouTube. It's called Put My Name Secrets. It's called Secrets for Jewish Community Watch. Secrets for Jewish Community Watch. And I detail the story of eventually confronting him, which is a risky endeavor for someone who's sexually abused. But if it goes well, and after 4.5 years mine did go well, it's a very therapeutic and very healing. So I'm certainly not, just a disclaimer, I'm not recommending it for anyone. I'm not saying it's the only way to heal, but I'm saying it was very healing for me. And in my case, I also got what I needed. I got the apology, I got everything else, although it did take 4.5, 5 years, and I detailed the experience there. But, this opened my eyes, this process. And the therapist was patient. he had sent me through for some evaluation, and the evaluation came back that I may be prone to addictive sexual behaviors. So he had that information without me knowing, and
And you
came.
weren't talking to him. Sorry, you weren't talking to him at all about pornography.
No,
at this, not
no,
at all.
no,
Wow.
no,
Okay.
no. I didn't.
This person. I want to hire this therapist for us.
No, I was talking to him about sexual abuse,
Right.
and then he explained to me how sexual abuse does not happen in a vacuum. Certainly not repeated sexual abuse. Right? It's one thing for someone to be walking on the street and raped by a stranger. You can't necessarily infer too much about their family life, but you can infer a lot from a kid who's going through abuse for a 3-year period and doesn't tell their parents. You can learn a lot about that home. So where he encouraged me to look, that I was willing to look, because he, I'm sure, encouraged much more than this, was A, at my childhood trauma and the way it affected me, and B, at the dynamics in my home and relationships between my parents, between myself and them, and all of that, to understand how it affected me, and in some cases to improve them and to improve that. And I'm a third of 9 siblings, so I still had siblings who were, my youngest brother at the time was probably 10 or 11 when I was starting this process. So my parents were still raising kids, so it was worthwhile for me as well, and they've been very open about it through this process. As I shared with them what I was learning and how it was affecting me, I have no doubt that it influenced the way they parented some of my other siblings, and just in general being much more aware of what could be going on with children and how it could be affecting them and what to look out for and to talk to them. One line I said earlier, which I don't want anyone to miss, so I'll repeat it, is that I kept the secret of my abuse for a long time. And in this story, a lot of it is the secrecy, but I did tell the first person who asked.
It's almost like you were waiting for someone to ask.
It's like I was. It's like I was. Right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the first therapist either. When I was 13 or 14, I got sent to a school. I got into a fight with another kid in school, and the school forced me to go to therapy. I was 13 or 14 years old, and I went for a while. I went for, I think from whenever that happened till the end of the school year. So, it could be many, many months. And the therapist never asked me about abuse. We spoke about a lot of different things. I remember her name. I remember her office. I remember going. I enjoyed it. Right. It was nice to have someone to talk to, but she never asked that question. But I'm convinced that if she would have asked, I would have answered the same way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay.
In any event, this that planted an important seed in me, that childhood trauma affects us, and in general, just being aware about our behaviors and things like that. Years in therapy will do that for you. He had poked at the idea of addiction, but in my mind, and this is so important for the way we talk about addiction, in my mind, there were only 3 things you can be addicted to: alcohol, drugs, and gambling. Those are the things that we, that as a society we speak of as being addicted to. Even when we talk about food, which, okay, yeah, there's a food addiction. We never talk about that as we may use the word, but we never mean it in the same way. Like, a gambling addict. He gambled his house away. We'll talk in that way. Not like, okay, he ate,
right.
He ate till he puked, or he puked after he ate because, for other reasons, the other side, the anorexic side of that addiction. But when we talk about sex, we very rarely hear those words, and that's still to this day. And that's something that I think we can change. We can do a better job of. Just let people know that, hey, this is something we could be addicted to. I speak to people now sometimes, and I'm thinking of someone I had this conversation with. I saw he was struggling, but I was talking about different things, and I asked him, what do you do when you're stressed? And he said, I used to, he said, usually I'll just have sex when I'm stressed. And as I asked a few more questions, I said, have you considered the possibility that you may be a sex addict? And he said, is that a thing? And this was 2 years ago, a guy in his 30s. Is that a thing? So no one would say that about alcohol, drugs, or gambling, right? Is that a thing? We can be addicted to heroin? It's yes, we've done a pretty good job with that messaging that we can be addicted to. I don't know that we've done as good a job with the messaging, especially around pornography, which so many people are very, very, very severely addicted to, and more people are talking about it, but more and more people need to talk about it.
And younger people.
Younger and younger, yeah.
That's what we're seeing. We're seeing a whole different world. It used to be when I was speaking to people about the kind of work we did at Lifeline, we work with addiction, so they would say something like, yeah, I have a brother, I know a friend. Now, when I speak about what's going on as far as screen abuse, and everyone says their kid, they don't know what to do with their kid, they don't know what's going on, their kids aren't leaving their rooms, they're not coming out for food. It's a whole different conversation now when we speak about it, and we take it out of the context of drugs, right? But we're looking at now maladaptive behaviors that become self-sabotaging. That's the bottom line. It's a reaction to pain. So
I can say even for myself, right? March 29th, a few days ago, was my 9-year anniversary in recovery. Not 9 years sobriety, 9 years since my first meeting. And when I came in, right, so 9 years ago, I was 27 years old. I was considered one of the young guys in the meeting. Right? Most of the guys in the meetings were 50, 60 years old. Like, it took time for sex addiction to catch up with someone. And keep in mind, 9 years ago is a few years after the first iPhone was released. And when the first iPhone was released, right, Tinder wasn't the first app on the phone, right? So it took a few years for some of these things to kind of catch up. So 2013, when I came into meetings, the internet and what it does to sex addiction wasn't fully expressed. It was somewhat, right? We already had the internet for 10 or 15 years, but or high-speed internet, but we don't have what we had today. And at that point in time, someone 27 years old was considered young in the meetings. Today, going to meetings, you'll see a lot of people, young 20s, coming in. Just porn has already kicked their ass at a very young age.
You know, it's interesting. What we see with our traffic is the exact same thing for not only porn or sex addiction, but for marijuana addiction. Well, I'm getting phone calls from 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and they're saying that it's been like a 8-year journey already. And they're, like you said, so to see younger and younger people come in, on one hand, it's shocking because it's talking about the intensity of it. On the other hand, what a message of hope. When a 20-year-old calls and I say, I'm going to introduce you to a 50-year-old who made this phone call, you know? And so, yeah, so it's double.
Yeah, I wonder if the internet plays a role in that as well, right? If you think about, you know, someone's 19 years old and addicted to marijuana, it means they've been doing it for a few years.
Right.
How do you get access to that? How do you get access to that? So today, with the internet, with social media, with our ability to connect with people from all walks of life, we can access things that would have been much harder to access years ago. As an example, right, not just pornography. Let's say someone wanted to find a prostitute 40 years ago. What are they doing? You're finding some dangerous street corner in the middle of the night and hoping the person you call over to the car is a prostitute and not a cop. Like, I mean, it's a very, very risky behavior. Right. Now someone can sit there from the comfort of their bedroom and just like know which website to go to and, call them in.
Well, just with that, marijuana is that it's one of the leading advertisers on gaming, on games. So we have kids coming in at 18, 19 that they found and experienced and got shipped their marijuana from ads that came up while they were gaming. So
interesting.
Yeah. But it's kind of, I'm before 1997. I'm before you were born in 85. I was born in 65. And
right.
And marijuana was just as powerful then, but people weren't coming in. People weren't coming in needing help so young. But not only that, think about this. When I got involved in working with addiction, and then very soon after, we hired somebody who is a certified sex addiction therapist. That was 1995, and internet pornography was not really the issue. It wasn't the issue, like you said. It came, right, later and later. So it's a different. But you can see how it evolved from the magazines to the regular magazines with the lingerie, to the Playboys, to the point where now it's not about sex anymore, right? These are just hits, and these are people who have tremendous amount of power and money who are able to manipulate our brains. So we can take it out of the whole conversation of sex. This is just plain boom hits for addiction, because that's I guess where the real money is, right?
It's definitely a different animal. I'm sure you know the organization Fight the New Drug,
From
and
you,
they're
from you.
right. Oh, interesting. So they combat pornography, right? So the obvious question is, what's with the name? What do you mean fight the new drug? Pornography is a very old one. They say, yeah, it's true that pornography has existed forever, right? You can go to these caves and you can see, drawings in the drawings inside of naked men or women, but that's not what we're dealing with today. This is a new drug. Internet pornography is a new phenomenon that we do not have the tools to deal with, and children at this age, at a very young age, are getting hooked on it way before they can, to put it in the legal terms, that before the age of consent, they're already hooked.
Right, right. So you know what? We're about solutions. A major part of the solution is identifying and speaking about, and your courage and bravery to be able to bring up this thing. I mean, within the first 2 minutes or 3 minutes of us talking, you spoke about your sexual abuse. I mean, that's the kind of conversations we have to have. It's got to be, this is what happened, and now this is what I'm doing about it. So just by saying it, yeah, I believe you're bringing it to the floor, which is so important. I appreciate that very, very much. Let's go a little bit to the solution. So you
Great.
see your life is a wreck. Where do you go? What do you do? You had a good therapist, thank God. You had a good therapist who got you thinking and looking, but didn't go to porn addiction. The therapist didn't go to porn necessarily.
He poked at it. So early on in therapy, he sent me for to do a series of evaluations, right? Rorschach tests, MMPI-2s, and stuff like that. He got the results, I didn't. In the report, it mentioned stuff about a possibly sexually addicted behavior, that it would be consistent with the profile. But he didn't show it to me. He just poked at it a few times. And as a matter of fact, gave me a book probably about 1.5 years into my therapy called Out of the Shadows by Patrick Carnes. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Carnes, he's considered the father of sex addiction. He's probably the very first well-known therapist to identify sex as being something one can be addicted to. And he's run treatment centers and written books on this subject, and and much more. And I read this book, and I returned it back to the therapist, and I said, this isn't me. And the reason was because I never tried to stop. I had no interest in stopping. There were a few times where porn got a little bit too much for me, like it was, taking up too much time. And yeah, I broke a computer here, or I had some religious guilt over it, or things like that. But I never really said, like, I really got to stop this. I really, really, really got to stop this. That I even went to talk to my therapist about it. It wasn't until I got into a relationship 5 years later, and I just saw my willingness to lie about these things. Yeah, my willingness to lie about these things, that it caught my attention as, hey, this is a little bit different. Because I wasn't someone who's comfortable lying about other things. It wasn't like, okay, the truth is irrelevant, I'll just do this anywhere. I saw that in this area, I just was a little bit, I get it, for lack of a better word, I was more desperate, so I was willing to do more desperate things. It wasn't consistent with my behavior in other areas of my life. And I questioned that. I was like, wow, like what is going on that suddenly I'm so comfortable I make bullshit up. I pretend to my girlfriend at the time, I'd be on the way to a massage parlor, literally on the way. I knew where I was going. And I'd call her up and pick a fight of some sort. It's like, oh, I don't know about our relationship. Like, I have to really think about whether or not this can work, Wow. And then I go do what I would do. In my mind, I would say, okay, I have an out. I told her to think, right, that this relationship is going to work. And then 2 hours later, I called her back. Like, I didn't just have the last conversation. I didn't just do what I did, but now I have this guilt. So I'm like, hey, what's up? Like, what's going on with me? And is this really about sex? When people call me, like when you talk about the solution, when people talk to me about porn addiction or sex addiction, I tell almost all of them the same thing. I say, listen, if it's just about sex, right? If the only reason you're going there is for sex, I very much doubt you'll have major problems with it. If you have reasons not to do it, religious reasons or ethical or moral reasons not to do it, great, we can discuss that, but a rabbi or others are better suited to deal with that. If you're getting your ass kicked by pornography, prostitutes, sex addiction of any kind, you're probably going there for some other reason other than sex. It's not just your sexual drive going there. Similar to what I said before, that for me, it was a place where the noise stopped, where I felt safe, where I stopped feeling lonely, where the boredom didn't kill me, right? That just being able to sit with yourself. Who is it who said that all the problems in the world come from man's inability to sit alone with himself for a few minutes? Something like that. So this is what it did for me, right? Anytime I needed to adjust the feeling I was feeling, right, even some good feelings. I was ecstatic about something. A business deal went well, and the feelings was too much for me. I said, okay, back to baseline. Pornography or some form of sexual acting out. Too much free time, too many days off, act out. Stressful event, act out. And on we went. Right. And the solution came from recognizing that and then saying, okay, like how do I deal with these issues? This isn't really about sex. My sex drive isn't going to kill me like this. This is about many other drives that are going on. A survival drive. You know, I saw there's a book by a guy named Lance Dodds called, I think, Breaking Free from Addiction. And he gave a great analogy for addiction, which I've remembered and shared a bunch of times. He said, you know, telling an addict to stop their addiction or even questioning what they're doing would be the equivalence of questioning someone who's cutting their leg off that's trapped under a boulder. Like if you just ask, why are you cutting your leg off? Yeah, I'm doing it to save the rest of my body, right? Like, look at what's actually going on here. And that's exactly what it feels like, right? Is yes, of course I see that I'm hurting my business or hurting my relationships or hurting my life or my finances, but I'm cutting my leg off to save my life. And that's what it feels like. So then the work and the solution came to, okay, what's that really about? Because it's not actually saving my life. And my life is not actually in the danger that it is. Like, what is this really about? And could I be honest about what's going on and then start dealing with those issues in a real way? So if I can't sit with myself for a few minutes because I get too much anxiety, okay, let's peel apart anxiety. So, you know what, I tell people all the time, you go to a meeting on sex addicts, you hear very little talk about sex. You know, here and there, someone comes in for the first time, says, yeah, you know, I've been cheating on my wife and she wants me to come here. Or like, you know, I'm obsessing about sex. But anyone who's there for a while is talking about their life. And that's what really the solution is how do I live with myself, you know, accept life on life's terms and not run away from it. And it takes diligence, it takes work, it takes a lot of honesty, it takes the ability to be able to sit in front of someone else, ask them for honest feedback, and take it when they give it. And right. Take it when they give it.
So what would be the first step if somebody's watching this and they're thinking like, you know what, he's speaking about me, but you know what, you had a real gift. You had a gift of the awareness, and also you were clear that you were clear that you had to change something. And most people that, at least at the beginning, they're not so clear that they have to change something. They're holding on to that, like you said, they're holding on to that which is they've been their best friend for so long. What do you suggest a person does when they're having these thoughts about, is this a problem? It's not a problem. Where do they go with that?
Listen, for those who it's working for, keep going, right? And if it hasn't beat you up yet, it will eventually. There's not, you know, you're not going to convince someone not to. For me, it was more about that when I got desperate, right? I was sitting in a therapist's office going to him once a week. He knew I had a problem, or he knew or thought strongly I had a problem with sex. He couldn't talk me out of it. What was very important was that when I realized it was a problem on my own, right? When I started crossing my own lines and not recognizing myself, I'm like, oh, this is a problem. I'm not a liar in other areas of my life, but I am here. What's up? Right. Why am I so doing this? Then I had an address to go to. And that's why I think the work you guys do and putting it out there and putting this message is like, okay, I'm not going to convince you to stop drinking, right? I'm not going to go to the bar and convince anyone to stop drinking. If it's working, keep going. But if it gets too much, you have an address to call. When it's too much for you, pick up the phone, you have an address to call. And then it's our job that when they call, we meet them with compassion and understanding and make them feel comfortable to come back again. But the number one most important thing is to ask for help.
Right. And I think also what I'm hearing from you is this challenging yourself, how you challenge yourself along the way. There's something about that I'm hearing, that you had a certain self-awareness, even in the pain, and there was a certain self-awareness that I don't hear a lot, especially you were younger, you were in your 20s at the time. So that's a gift, to have that type of self-awareness. And I think for the average person, at least the average people that we're meeting, that doesn't come for years. And there's pain along the way. So
right, that's unfortunate, is how difficult it is to look at ourselves and be honest about what's going on.
Right.
Expression I heard the other day, sometimes you have to get out of the bottle and read the label, right?
Yeah, that's great.
I got to be honest about what we're seeing, right? We would look at someone else and we would say it in a second, like, come on, this guy's not right. There's something wrong. What's going on?
Right.
Why does he like alcohol all the time? Like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Why is there always a bottle around?
We have to name it. We
have a hard time.
Yeah, we have to name it for what it is. No question, it's addiction, and it needs to be named and called that. But ultimately, it's a reaction to pain. At least this is the model that we work with. This is a reaction to pain. And I believe, especially being a Chabad house, our job in the world is to alleviate pain, period. That's what we have to be doing. Alleviate suffering, even a little bit, from anyone else around us. That's what we're put in this world to do. And if we're identifying that addiction is pain, that's where we have to be able to be all in, to be there for people, to help them see, and especially people who don't necessarily know they're in the pain. That's sometimes the hardest.
That's always hardest. When someone's honest about what's going on, that's where it's easy. It works well. When someone is,
I had a conversation last week. Someone was describing to me what was going on in their life. They did, and I said, "Wow, that sounds so painful." And they said, "No, it doesn't. Where's the pain? What do you mean?"
Right.
If we can have that kind of empathetic eye towards ourselves. But first and foremost, it starts, I think, the conversations we're having and the modeling that you're doing. And I really appreciate it. What I'd love to do as we wrap up is book for you and your wife to come on. I think some people are probably wondering what's going on. Where is
she on? I thought she joined for a minute. She's still on? No, she's not. She's probably putting the kids to sleep. Listen, that's the very first conversation we had. I said to you that it would be amazing if my wife would speak and share her story. And you said, "Would you ask?" And I said, "Yeah, but it'll probably be better, if you ask."
No,
so by all means.
I remember it differently. I said, "Would you ask?" You said, No. Well, maybe there was. Yeah.
That's entirely possible that it took me a little bit of time to get there, but I did. And I think you did. And she said, "Hey, if it can help some people, then by all means." I don't think she sees the uniqueness of her approach. For whatever, for her, I was very fortunate that she was able to see pretty clearly that my sex addiction was not personal to her.
Right.
And she said, for whatever reason, that's my drug of choice. My drug of choice is sex. It's no more personal than someone whose drug of choice is cocaine. Right? It's not about, I wasn't rejecting her, saying for this, I was numbing my pain through this, and this became my drug of choice. And kudos to her for being able to see that. So I would love for her to share her message more broadly. I think a lot of people can benefit from it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say upon conclusion that is absolutely unique amongst women to feel the devastation and to experience that personal feeling of betrayal. I mean, that's where I think our hearts have to really go out, and have this become more and more urgent to talk about how the impact of addiction, sex addiction for sure, but any addiction, on the wives, on the children, on the family members, and we have to. This is generational. So what we're doing here is for we're stopping the madness.
I want to say something else on recovery itself, because oftentimes when people come in and they say like, oh, like I can't believe I'm an addict. I say, you think that's what unique about people in recovery? There are many addicts everywhere. Like that's not what's unique about us. Like, oh, we're the addicts. No, we're the addicts who are working on it. Like we're the ones in recovery. This is a place of pride, not a place of of shame. A few weeks ago, I attended a weekend, the Jewish Recovery Retreat, Mayor Kessler's retreat, and his kind of call to action to the world is we should be celebrating addicts. These are people working on themselves. These are people working hard to heal something. This is not a source of shame. This is a source of huge pride. What's unique about us is not our problem. What's unique about us is our willingness to find a solution and to work on it. And he said for him to host a weekend where he invites not only addicts, but their families and friends and others who can get a window in to this world. How amazing is that? And my wife gave me that gift also. People ask, how do I share as comfortably as I do, right? Taking to the TED stage, talk about, porn addiction, or speaking as comfortably as I do about sex abuse and sex addiction. So the sex abuse was prior to my wife, for sure. But the sex addiction, if she had shame around it, I wouldn't be talking about it, to be clear. And she was actually the one who helped heal the shame that I still had around the sex addiction. On a couple of occasions, this is how, on a couple of occasions, she'd come back from dinner with friends, and she says to me, I hope you don't mind, but, a friend had shared that their husband cheated on them or was struggling with something, and I thought it would be, or that they're dealing with a drug problem or something else, and I thought it would be helpful for them so they feel more comfortable with me and just, give them a little bit of hope to share your story. So I said, it's not actually my story. It's, it's your story too. You're a participant in this. You're free to share. It's not only my story.
Right.
You're certainly free to share. But I saw the way she would talk about it, and it was with so much pride that I went to meetings, that I went to recovery, that I was a recovering sex addict. Like all of this, she had so much pride in it. So and it's like, oh, this is something to be proud of. I was very proud that I was in recovery, to be sure, but I was ashamed of the sex addiction component. I was like, why didn't I get a better addiction? Why do I get this embarrassing one? I see like the guys with the NA and AA, they're walking around with like, big football. So I'm 8 years sober, or people at a table. It's like, oh, I don't drink alcohol anymore. I swore it off. And I was like, I wouldn't say that about porn. Like I buried my head in the sand before, but my wife kept, on a few occasions said that. And I just saw the pride that she had every time I went to a meeting, or every time I met with my sponsor, met with a sponsee. And she's like, wow, I'm so proud of my husband that he does this. And another occasion, I remember someone telling her, like, you're not afraid that your husband's going to cheat on you, like he's a sex addict? And she says, on the contrary, I feel like I have more security with him in recovery than an average person who's not an addict, who's not in recovery. Like, he's working on it. And even if something were to happen, he has a sponsor that he's accountable to. He has a program that he's accountable to. So I feel much safer with him than I think the average person would feel with their husband, who's not an addict and not in recovery. So those kind of things that eventually entered my, penetrated this and said, okay, maybe I can feel some pride and start talking about this. So hopefully we see more of that.
Ellie Nash, please thank your wife. Please, you know what? Thank your lucky stars for your wife. I mean, big time blessed. And as we are to have you too. So thank you so very, very much for joining us tonight. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with your wife and you together. And then eventually we're going to bring your kids in, because this is a family affair.
I'll end with this. Last note. So, when I did the TED Talk, a couple months later, I was in my office, and I said, hey, did they release it yet? Like, I didn't get an email from anyone. Like, did they publish it? Did they not? It's been a couple of months. So I go to Google, I type in my name, because I figured I type in my name, it would show up. Like, TED Talk is like 20 million subscribers at the time, YouTube channel, and it pops up. I see it was released earlier that week. No one sent me an email, but I see that it was published like 2 or 3 days before.
Right.
And the first thought I had, it sinks into my head, I was like, oh, shoot. My son at the time was a year old, even less than a year. Yeah, it was right around his first birthday was when it was published. And I said, oh, shoot. When this kid gets to middle school or high school, he's going to be tortured like crazy, tormented over this thing is, who's your father? Put your name in. The first thing, escaping porn addiction, TED Talk. I'm like, oh, man, what did I do to this kid? And it sat with me. I felt like a lot of discomfort for a few days. Like, do I email them, take it down? Will they even listen or anything else? And then I said, you know what? A lot can change between now and then. And maybe I can have a part in that. Maybe those who are listening to can have as well. I said, maybe between now and the time he's in middle school, my goal and the goal that I can share with those listening is that people view porn addiction and sex addiction the same way they view other addictions. We don't look down at it. We understand it. We have some compassion for it. We realize that it's a disease that needs to be treated. The person deserves compassion and understanding, and the same is true for a sex addict. So on that, I've shared my goal. Please help me reach it. I don't want my kid to be tormented in middle school.
All right. Thank you
Have
so much. All the very best. Good night.
Take care.